May 2025, the entire tourist island of Koh Samui, Thailand's jewel, suddenly became the epicenter of a horrifying case. At a dormitory complex of a renowned hospital on the island, a nurse was found lifeless, wearing only underwear on her lower body, with a cloth wrapped tightly around her neck, and the room door left slightly ajar. This was a classic locked room crime scene in notorious murder cases, sending chills down everyone's spine at the perpetrator's cunning. The more police investigated, the more abnormalities they discovered, and the killer turned out to be someone no one suspected. Before we embark on today's journey exploring this case, if you love true crime stories, please like, subscribe to Crime Documentary Files, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any true crime cases we bring you. Thank you so much. Koh Samui is a beautiful island in the Gulf of Thailand, long famous as a global tourist destination thanks to its tropical beauty. The island boasts excellent security management, with tourist police on duty 24/7 to ensure safety and assist visitors when needed. The locals are also known for their friendliness, making Koh Samui one of the safest and most reliable islands in Thailand. However, in late May 2025, the island's wonderful tourism image was severely damaged after a shocking murder occurred at a private hospital. On the morning of May 21, 2025, the atmosphere on Koh Samui Island remained fresh and peaceful as usual. At a private hospital in Bophoot subdistrict, doctors and nurses began their early shift, creating the routine rhythm of a busy morning. But today, amid that routine, something was unusual. An empty spot in the medical team caught everyone's attention immediately. Anchulee Wongmuang, the dedicated head nurse, known for being diligent, serious, and punctual to the minute, was absent without any prior notice. This was completely contrary to her character. Anchulee was always the first to arrive and last to leave, never missing a shift or arriving late even once. Her silence this morning immediately worried her colleagues. Initially, they tried to reassure each other that she might have a personal matter. But when repeated calls went unanswered, anxiety began to spread throughout the department. After a few moments of hesitation, a group of Anchulee's close colleagues decided to go to her residence, the staff dormitory near the hospital, to find out what was happening. Room 211, where head nurse Anchulee lived, was located on the second floor of the hospital dormitory, right next to the room of another nursing assistant. When they arrived, they found the room door locked from the inside. They knocked continuously and called out her name loudly, but inside was complete silence, no response. Sensing something was wrong, one of them rushed to find the spare key held by the dormitory management, and the moment the door swung open, everyone froze in horror. Before their eyes was a terrifying scene. Anchulee lay motionless on the bed, her lower body wearing only underwear, a t-shirt wrapped tightly around her neck, and her face covered by a jacket. The room was stifling, belongings were in disarray, and the air was thick with dread. After a few seconds of utter shock, a nurse screamed, and then everyone frantically called the Royal Thai Police, Bophoot Station. Just minutes later, police cars with wailing sirens broke the quiet morning of Koh Samui. Investigation teams and forensic units quickly arrived to seal off the crime scene. Detective Manos was the first to step into that cold room. Light from the hallway barely illuminated the chaotic mess scattered across the floor. Broken items, drawers flung open, and bedding shoved aside showed that the victim had struggled violently until her final moment. On the bed, Anchulee lay on her back, motionless, her face obscured by a jacket, her body wearing only thin underwear. Torn pieces of sleepwear were scattered on the floor, clear evidence of a fierce struggle in this confined space. Manos surveyed the room. There were no signs of forced entry. The lock and windows were intact. This could only mean two possibilities. Either the victim had opened the door for the killer herself, or the perpetrator had entered through another way yet to be discovered. On the floor, under the dim flashlight, he found an empty condom box discarded near the bed. From this, police understood that this murder case wasn't just a simple homicide, but might also conceal a disgusting sexual assault crime. Not long after, Lieutenant Colonel Prachwap, head of the Special Investigation Team, also arrived at the scene. He ordered all investigators present to meticulously and accurately record every smallest detail, but also emphasized that they must absolutely not rush to any subjective conclusions before having complete scientific evidence. Recognizing the severity and special nature of the case, he immediately mobilized Forensic Team 8 from Surat Thani province to assist with the examination. The task assigned to this forensic team was to conduct a thorough, meticulous examination of every corner and hidden spot of the room, not missing any trace or clue, however small. Alongside the crime scene examination, a professional forensic team was also deployed to approach and examine the unfortunate nurse's body. Through careful and professional preliminary examination, the forensic doctors provided initial findings. They stated that no other serious injuries were found on the victim's body, except for obvious bruising around the neck area. However, experts also discovered additional injuries on the victim's body: bleeding and abrasions on the right side of the neck, along with a fairly large contusion on the crown of the head. These injuries, according to forensic doctors, were likely the result of strong impacts occurring while the victim was desperately struggling and resisting the killer in her final moments. Based on the comprehensive clinical and pathological signs, the forensic team clearly determined the primary cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. Particularly important, based on the remaining body temperature at the time of examination, combined with rigor mortis and other biological signs, forensic experts estimated the time of death was between 3 and 4 a.m. that same day. According to initial investigation findings, the unfortunate nurse lived alone in dormitory room 211 with no roommate or cohabitant. This meant no one could have witnessed or prevented what happened that fateful night. Tracing back the timeline, on the evening before the tragedy occurred, she had worked the late shift at the hospital as usual, then returned to her small room to rest. And then, sometime after midnight, she encountered this horrific disaster right in her own room. However, notably, although the crime scene had many fairly clear and distinctive traces, such as the condom box, the victim's position, the state of clothing, under the experienced eyes of veteran investigators, all these details weren't entirely convincing. They suspected this wasn't a natural crime scene, but actually a deliberately staged case. The killer very likely intentionally rearranged the scene after the victim's death, aiming to mislead the investigation. By creating false evidence, the killer wanted police to believe this was a sexually motivated case. Precisely because they recognized the abnormalities at the scene, police patiently awaited detailed forensic examination results from the laboratory before making any conclusions. One of the key questions police needed to clarify was, had the victim actually been sexually assaulted? And if assault did occur, did this criminal act happen before or after the victim stopped breathing? Besides findings at the scene, several other important clues were gradually noted. First, the victim's personal car had mysteriously disappeared. The parking lot in the dormitory complex, where Anchulee's silver-gray Bangkok-plated Nissan sedan usually parked in its familiar spot, was empty that morning, with no trace of the vehicle. Noticing this abnormality, police immediately deployed a search, combing through the hospital's vast premises and surrounding areas, but still found no trace of the car anywhere. Based on this circumstance, investigators concluded that the killer likely stole the victim's car as a means to escape the scene after committing the crime. Additionally, during meticulous examination of the room, police discovered a small plastic box used for storing jewelry, but when opened for inspection, it was completely empty inside. Close colleagues of Anchulee said she usually wore a beautiful gold ring and a pair of gold earrings. However, when thoroughly checking the victim's body at the scene, the ring had disappeared. Even one earring was missing. From this specific evidence, one could conclude the perpetrator was not only a murderer, but also had robbed the victim's property. Faced with these serious findings, Colonel Thong Srisuk, the Beaufoot police station chief, immediately made a detailed report to higher command about the initial situation, while deploying an emergency manhunt plan to capture the killer. Based on evidence and traces collected, there was a high probability the perpetrator wasn't a complete stranger, but might be someone acquainted with the victim, or at least someone living near the area. The reason was that the scene showed no signs of violent break-in from outside. Moreover, according to what people knew about Anchulee, she was extremely cautious, especially having to live alone in the dormitory room. With such a personality, she certainly wouldn't easily open the door to a complete stranger in the middle of the night. Therefore, the killer was very likely someone the victim didn't feel guarded against, or someone who found a way to approach without raising suspicion. To clarify the timeline and developments of the fateful night, police thoroughly interviewed colleagues who worked the same shift as Anchulee. From their testimonies, several important details were added to the investigation file. Specifically, on the night before the tragedy, colleagues saw her finish her shift and leave the hospital for the dormitory around 10 p.m. However, notably, not long after, someone saw her drive out and return to her room for the last time around 2 a.m. A neighbor provided crucial information that shortly after Anchulee returned to her room, they suddenly heard a panicked and desperate cry for help coming from the direction of the nurse's room. That cry rang out only once, then everything suddenly fell into terrifying silence. The neighbor at the time thought it might just be normal noise or they misheard, so didn't pay much attention. Based on this valuable information, combined with the forensic estimate of time of death, investigators could relatively accurately picture the time frame of the crime as between 2 and 3 a.m. Unfortunately, the dormitory complex where the case occurred was completely unequipped with security cameras. This absence made it extremely difficult to track and identify who had entered and exited the area at midnight. But in compensation, the victim's missing car became an extremely important clue. That very morning, after receiving complete reports on the situation, an order to lock down the entire island of Samui was issued. According to this order, all ferry terminals, boat docks, and seaports, large and small across Koh Samui, had to apply maximum strict control measures. Simultaneously, the investigation team immediately sent emergency notifications to all security forces on the island, including traffic checkpoints, ports, and patrol forces on main roads. This notification included detailed identifying characteristics of the victim's silver-gray Bangkok-plated Nissan sedan. From that moment, a large-scale, urgent, and tense manhunt officially began. Because if they couldn't quickly catch the killer in this brief, golden time frame, he would very likely find a way to escape from the island. Or worse, he might have already disposed of important evidence, causing the case to lose crucial clues and possibly reach a dead end. Parallel to the manhunt, work to verify the victim's identity and social circle was also prioritized. With the assessment that the perpetrator was someone known to the victim, finding the suspect among the victim's social relationships was entirely feasible. The victim, Anchulee Wongmuang, 36, was a gentle, dedicated woman beloved by all colleagues. She was born and raised in Chiang Rai Province, northern Thailand. From childhood, Anchulee harbored a dream of wearing the white nurse's blouse and caring for patients needing treatment. Thanks to her intelligence and diligence, she passed the nursing entrance exam, then studied diligently, believing this work would help her realize her dream of serving the community. After graduation, she began working at a hospital in the capital Bangkok, living in Sai Mai district. A few years later, Anchulee was hired to work at a private hospital on Koh Samui Island. At the private hospital where Anchulee worked, she was known as a veteran nurse with many years of experience, holding the important position of head nurse. In the work environment, all colleagues cherished her and often called her by the affectionate nickname Nook. In the eyes of those around her, Nook was a harmonious, approachable woman who always knew how to create a comfortable atmosphere in the collective. Moreover, she was known as someone extremely dedicated to her profession, putting responsibility to patients first, while living very discreetly, never letting personal matters affect her work. Despite busy work with long shifts and pressure from caring for critically ill patients, she always tried to maintain a bright, warm smile when dealing with patients. She was always willing to work extra hours whenever the hospital was short-staffed. Regarding her personal life, Anchulee had a fairly simple and modest lifestyle, not flashy or showy. At 36, she was still single, not yet married. Some close friends shared that Nook placed career and work above all else, considering it the top priority in her life. Therefore, she rarely spent time at noisy parties, entertainment, or complicated romantic relationships. She lived very privately, seriously guarding her personal privacy. Financially, she managed her life quite well, not involved in any debts or money troubles. In social relationships, she was rated as harmonious, easygoing, with no clear personal conflicts or serious clashes with anyone, whether colleagues or acquaintances. She rented room 211 in the dormitory near the hospital, lived alone, and only occasionally took days off to visit family in her hometown of Chiang Rai. Such a clean record, such a decent person, and such a simple life made this painful tragedy even more heartbreaking and unacceptable. Public opinion inside and outside the hospital, from colleagues to former patients, from locals to the Samui Island community, everyone felt extremely sorry for the unfortunate fate of this kind nurse. Everyone hoped police would soon find and arrest the perpetrator as quickly as possible to restore justice for this dedicated and kind nurse. However, a painful paradox was that the victim's clean record inadvertently became a major barrier, making it difficult for police in their investigation. Because the victim lived discreetly, harmoniously, with no grudges against anyone, identifying who could be the killer became extremely difficult. The motive for the crime remained a big question mark at this point, an unsolved mystery. Investigators had to consider many different hypotheses. Perhaps the killer initially only intended to rob, but when discovered and resisted by the victim, killed her to silence her, then staged a false scene to mislead. Or conversely, perhaps he intended to commit sexual assault, but when met with fierce resistance, killed the victim, then opportunistically robbed her property. Both scenarios were possible. The killer's identity therefore remained in total darkness. Not only that, police couldn't find any direct witnesses who could provide information about the killer's appearance or actions. The dormitory at night was deserted, with almost no one moving about. The only person lucky enough to hear sounds only heard noise, but never saw who the perpetrator was. To quickly solve the case, the Surat Thani Province Major Crimes Investigation Team was established under the direct command of the Deputy Provincial Police Director. Investigation units were deployed simultaneously, including crime scene examination, forensic evidence collection, witness and related person interrogation, and searching for property evidence and suspects on the island. First, forensic teams worked urgently in room 211 for many hours to collect maximum evidence. Every square inch of bed sheets, floor, and doorways was meticulously checked with ultraviolet light. Strange fingerprints were found on the door handle and several objects. Many hair strands found near the bed and at the back window were carefully collected. The examination team also took fluid samples from the bed sheets to examine for stranger DNA traces. The white t-shirt used to strangle the victim's neck was removed and taken for fingerprint and sweat analysis. Additionally, the empty condom box and wrapper were sealed as important evidence. All this evidence was sent to Central Laboratory 8 for urgent analysis. Complete examination results were expected in a few days, but the initial preliminary report found no clear signs of assault on the victim's body. However, forensic experts said this possibility couldn't be completely ruled out, as the killer might have used a condom during the crime. Only when DNA examination results on all evidence were returned could they determine the true nature of the crime and the accurate investigation direction. While waiting for Central Laboratory 8 to analyze the samples, police shifted focus to interrogating witnesses and dormitory residents. Among a series of seemingly scattered testimonies, one piece of information quickly stood out. Room 210, right next to the victim's room, was rented by a female nursing assistant working at the same hospital. What particularly interested investigators was this woman's boyfriend, a local man around 30 named Suat, who frequently stayed overnight there. During interviews with people living around the dormitory, some colleagues provided information that caught investigators' attention. The night before, they saw a young man named Suat, the boyfriend of the nurse in room 210 next door, appear in the hospital area. According to his girlfriend's testimony, Suat that night hitched a ride with a friend to the hospital to pick her up after her shift. He said over the phone he was waiting for her in the parking lot as arranged, but when the nurse finished her shift and went to the parking lot, Suat was nowhere to be found. More worryingly, even early the next morning there was still no trace of Suat. His girlfriend tried to contact him by phone many times, but Suat's phone either didn't answer. This sudden disappearance without explanation immediately made police suspicious. He suddenly disappeared mysteriously without clear reason, and the timing of his disappearance suspiciously coincided with the night of the murder. Upon closer analysis, investigators recognized many factors that made Suwat a potential suspect. First, if he was really at the hospital that night, he very likely knew the dormitory structure well from frequently visiting because his girlfriend lived there. This knowledge of the terrain could help him easily access the victim's room without being detected. Second, victim Anchulee certainly knew Suwat by sight as he was her colleague's boyfriend living right next door. Therefore, if she happened to encounter Suwat late at night, she could have been complacent and off guard. With these experience-based analyses, police decided to target Suwat as the primary suspect. Immediately, the forensic team was sent to room 210 to collect evidence. They proceeded to collect fingerprints, DNA samples from personal items, fallen hair strands, and any biological traces that could identify him. The purpose was to compare with samples collected from the victim's room. Although examination results weren't available immediately, the investigators' professional instincts told them the real suspect was this neighbor. While waiting for DNA examination results, the investigation team began quietly investigating the man named Suwat. His full name was Suwat Kunthong, 30 years old, from Trang province in southern Thailand. Born into a poor working family, Suwat only finished high school then dropped out, drifting around to make a living. A few years ago, he left his hometown and headed to Koh Samui Island, hoping to find stable work. He did various jobs to survive, from construction helper to bar server to seasonal worker at resorts. But what particularly caught police attention wasn't his poor background, but his severe online gambling addiction. Suwat was drowning in debt, borrowing everywhere, and frequently betting on soccer online. His girlfriend also confirmed that recently, Suwat often complained about being broke, even borrowing money from her and hospital colleagues with the reason need to pay debts urgently. From this, the crime motive gradually became clearer in police eyes. A man driven to a corner by gambling, so desperate for money he might risk stealing property, and when discovered by the victim, panicked, feared being reported, so killed her to silence her, accidentally turning himself into a murderer. Simultaneously, the search for the evidence vehicle also made a breakthrough. On the afternoon of May 21st, while searching parking lots on the island, police received a report of discovering a silver Nissan of unknown ownership parked at a shopping center parking lot in Wongmuang, about 2.5 miles from the crime scene. Comparing license plates, the investigation team was delighted as this was indeed Anchulee's car. Shopping center security cameras showed this car was driven there by an unfamiliar man around 4:45 a.m. on May 21st and left there. The extracted image wasn't very clear, but was enough to recognize it was a young man wearing dark clothing, somewhat stocky. More importantly, from the video, police identified a characteristic that this man stepped down from the driver's seat, meaning he personally drove the victim's car there. Therefore, this person was almost certainly the killer or directly related to Anchulee's death. Early afternoon on May 21st, the special investigation team held an emergency meeting, assessing high probability that Suwat and the person appearing in the video leaving the car in Wongmuang were the same person. A few hours later, all doubts were verified almost 100%. Preliminary examination results showed Suwat's fingerprints matched strange prints in Anchulee's room. DNA and hair results also showed matching signs, but needed more detailed analysis for confirmation. But this evidence was enough for police to proceed with finding Suwat. Through coordinated investigation, an island-wide search order was issued with complete identifying information. Police spread out in all directions, coordinating with local military to blockade ports and boat terminals. Suwat's image was also quickly gathered from his Facebook account and provided to checkpoints. Through taking his girlfriend's testimony, police knew he didn't have his own vehicle, mainly hitching rides with his girlfriend or borrowing friends' motorcycles. So after leaving the car at the shopping center, how did he move? Checking area cameras, police saw Suwat after parking took a taxi and left. The taxi driver was later summoned and provided useful information that around nearly 5 a.m. on May 21st, he drove a young man matching Suwat's description from the parking lot to the Manhunt area. This young man got out at an intersection near Manhunt, paid cash, then walked inside. Searching the Manhunt area in that direction, by the evening of May 21st, police found a mobile phone and a set of keys discarded under the floor of an abandoned house by the road in Manhunt. It appeared Suwat had thrown them away to erase traces. The official arrest warrant was approved by Koh Samui Court on the evening of May 21st, charging Suwat with theft and suspected murder. However, Suwat proved more cunning and reckless than anticipated. Knowing he could hardly leave the island with police blocking roads, he chose to hide right on the island. Investigation continued collecting evidence and information from Suwat's friends and colleagues. Someone said on the evening of May 21st, Suwat contacted a friend to ask for shelter, specifically the owner of a Som Tam, papaya salad restaurant where he once worked. From this clue, by dawn on May 22nd, police suddenly raided a Som Tam restaurant in Manhunt subdistrict and found Suwat there. At 2 a.m. on May 22nd, after nearly 24 hours of hiding, Suwat was arrested while cowering in the restaurant kitchen corner. The capture operation proceeded quickly. Suwat at this point was exhausted, so didn't resist. Police found on him some cash and a deep bite mark on his finger. News of catching the suspect quickly spread, and Samui residents somewhat breathed easier. But police work wasn't finished. Now was the time to take statements and reconstruct the entire case, finding answers to the final mysteries. At Beaufoot Police Station on the morning of May 22nd, Suwat initially beat around the bush denying guilt. He claimed he was just out all night, knew nothing about the case. But faced with irrefutable evidence, Suwat finally bowed his head and confessed, agreeing to cooperate with investigators. Suwat's confession made many shudder. He stated that on the night of May 20th, he returned to his girlfriend's room 210, but secretly planned to sneak to the next room to steal property. Suwat knew well that Anchulee lived alone and wore jewelry, plus had just received her salary, so surely had plenty of money. Getting there, he quietly went to the back door of room 210. Between rooms 210 and 211 was a small balcony with air conditioners placed near each other. Suwat climbed over the balcony along the air conditioner units, luckily finding Anchulee's back door unlocked, as she had a habit of leaving it slightly open for ventilation. Squeezing through the small door, Suwat broke into the victim's room around 2:30 a.m. on May 21st. Inside the room, dimly lit by a nightlight, Anchulee was sleeping soundly on the bed. Suwat breathed softly, observing, seeing on the dressing table a small bag containing jewelry. Inside was the victim's gold ring and pair of earrings. Heart pounding, he carefully grabbed the gold bag and put it in his pants pocket. He also sharp-eyedly saw a car key set placed on a shelf near the door. The prospect of getting the car to escape delighted him. Suwat immediately took the car keys intending to flee, but Anchulee suddenly woke with a start and saw a strange shadow in the room. She panicked and screamed. Afraid of being exposed, Suwat lunged forward to cover her mouth and locked his arms around the victim's neck from behind. Anchulee struggled fiercely. Despite her small stature, she also bit hard into the intruder's hand. In pain and panic, Suwat became bestial. He tightened his arm around the victim's neck, holding until he heard her make no more sounds. In panic, Suwat threw the victim down to the floor, then used both hands to strangle her neck hard until the body under his hands went limp and motionless. The room became deathly silent. Only Suwat's panting breath remained. He released his hands. Anchulee lay there with eyes staring wide, lifeless. Realizing he had just killed someone, Suwat was extremely terrified. But just seconds later, survival instinct made him calmly think of ways to cover up. Very little time remained. His girlfriend in the next room could wake up at any moment. Suwat carried the victim's body and placed it back on the bed. His mind spun looking for ways to stage the scene so police would think this was an assault case. That way he hoped police would investigate in the wrong direction, while he himself would be eliminated from suspicion. Thinking so, Suwat removed the rest of the victim's nightgown, threw clothes over the victim's face to create a false scene. He glanced and saw a white t-shirt on a chair, immediately got the idea to use the white shirt wrapped tightly around the victim's neck, both to cover the handprint marks and to fake the scene that she suffocated when the killer assaulted her. Done, Suwat picked up the condom box and placed it beside to deliberately leave traces of sexual misconduct. After that, he calmly turned off the room light, took the jewelry bag, car keys, and victim's phone, then went out the main door, closing it behind him. He quietly returned to his girlfriend's room 210 via the hallway corridor. His girlfriend was still sleeping soundly, completely unaware of the horrific incident that just happened right next door. Suwat quickly changed clothes, hastily grabbed a mesh cap to cover his face, then took Anchulee's car keys and left the dormitory. He then drove away in the darkness before dawn, heading straight toward Choweng Town. Suwat calculated that if hiding among the bustling tourists in Choweng, it might be easier to evade. Near 5 a.m., he parked the car in the shopping center parking lot and left it there. Before leaving, he wiped traces in the car, took the victim's identity documents, and carefully checked the gold bag in his shirt. Then he caught a taxi to the Manhunt area. In the taxi, he called a friend who owned a Somtam restaurant to ask for help. His friend agreed to let him stay temporarily at the restaurant, thinking Suwat might just be hiding from debt. Arriving in Manhunt, Suwat quickly sold the victim's gold ring to an acquaintance for 3,000 baht, approximately $85, to spend, then threw away the phone and car keys into an abandoned house area. He thought if police didn't find the victim's phone, they might have difficulty knowing the last contacts, and if the car keys were missing, they would think the killer used that car to escape. After that, Suwat hid throughout the night of May 21st by all means. He recounted initially hiding on the beach, sometimes wading into water, sometimes lying along the sandy shore covering himself with branches and leaves, sand and dirt for camouflage. When hearing law enforcement activity, he even climbed high trees to hide, and at times acted like a homeless person, putting a rice sack on his head, wrapping a torn blanket around himself wandering. Throughout that night, police searched everywhere. Suwat tasted extreme fear, at times thinking he was about to be caught. Finally exhausted and hungry, he made his way to his friend's Somtam restaurant near dawn on May 22nd. The restaurant owner let him stay in the kitchen. Before he could do anything next, police raided and arrested him. Those cold statements were recounted in detail by Suwat during the suspect's escort to the crime scene. On the afternoon of May 22nd, police brought Suwat wearing a helmet and bulletproof vest to the dormitory, then asked him to reenact the crime. He pointed out how to climb the balcony, mimicked the actions of killing the victim and staging the false scene. A large number of residents and the victim's colleagues stood watching in utter grief. Anchulee's father was also present, eyes red from tears. When the perpetrator reenacted how he strangled the victim and faked the condom scene, many angry shouts rang out from the crowd. When police escorted Suwat to the special vehicle to take him to temporary detention, a group of Anchulee's colleagues cried and rushed forward. The victim's father at this point angrily lunged forward, blocking the vehicle carrying the criminal to look directly at the one who had killed his daughter. Police had great difficulty stopping the agitated crowd. They quickly removed the suspect from the scene. Late that afternoon, Suwat Kunthong was officially charged with serious crimes: illegal home invasion, robbery, and murder. He signed the confession statement, admitting all acts exactly as investigation results showed. By this point, the investigation journey was nearly closed. The veil of mystery had been lifted. There was no more doubt. The neighbor right next door was the perpetrator. With the suspect's arrest along with a clear confession, the case was quickly transferred to Surat Thani Provincial Prosecutor's Office. On May 25, 2025, Koh Samui Provincial Court approved the decision to temporarily detain Suwat during investigation and prosecution. He was prosecuted with multiple charges, including murder carrying a maximum penalty of death under Thai law. During the procedural hearing, prosecutors emphasized the particularly serious and cruel nature of the criminal act, while arguing the killer deliberately concealed the crime by staging the scene, showing no remorse immediately after committing the crime. Therefore, there was no basis for leniency. The defense attorney appointed by the court for Suwat, tried to argue that the defendant committed the crime impulsively, lacking restraint, and without prior intent to kill. They emphasized that Suwat initially only intended to steal property, and only when the victim resisted too fiercely did he panic and cause the murder. However, the defendant's calculated chain of behavior afterward refuted this impulsivity argument. Before the court, Suwat bowed his head, admitting guilt, repeatedly saying he didn't intend to and deeply regretted it. He testified that he was haunted by a gambling debt of 50,000 baht, approximately $1,400, couldn't repay it, so desperately thought to steal gold. The presiding judge shook his head many times, calling this an extremely brutal and selfish act. The victim's family, including Anchulee's father and younger sister, attended, requesting the court to handle strictly, even suggesting the death penalty for the defendant. As of October 2025, the first instance trial had not yet issued a final verdict, still in the stage of taking testimony and reviewing supplementary evidence. However, experts predict the harshest sentence still awaits Suwat Kunthong. With the confession and clear evidence, he will very likely be sentenced to death for murder, plus additional penalties for robbery and break-in. According to Thai law, if the defendant confesses, the court may reduce the sentence to life imprisonment, but this depends on attitude and assessment of the level of remorse. In this case, Thai public opinion largely demands strict justice. Therefore, the court will very likely sentence Suwat to life imprisonment or death. Whatever the result, one thing is certain: he will pay the rightful price for his crime. What are your thoughts on today's case? What sentence will Suwat Kunthong receive? Please share in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in upcoming videos.